Ion arrived at the banquet hall with his heart already racing. The parking lot was almost empty, which made no sense. He checked the time again, hoping his phone was wrong. It wasn't. He pushed the glass door open and stepped inside, only to be met with silence instead of music. The baby shower had ended. Chairs were stacked. Balloons sagged near the ceiling. Half the decorations were gone, as if the joy had already been packed away. He stood still, feeling like he had walked into the aftermath of a storm. Just hours ago, this place had been full of laughter, photos, and celebration for his sister's unborn child. Now it felt cold and distant. His chest tightened with guilt. He had tried everything to get there on time. His meeting had gone over time, his boss refusing to let anyone leave. Traffic had trapped him. He had called, texted, explained. No one had replied. Across the hall, he saw his sister Santa surrounded by relatives. She was smiling, glowing, one hand on her belly. Everyone was focused on her. No one looked his way. For a brief moment, Ion thought about turning around and leaving quietly, pretending he had never come. But before he could move, his mother spotted him. She walked toward him with measured steps, her face calm but unreadable. His father followed, holding a thin white envelope. Ion straightened, ready to apologize, to explain again. He opened his mouth, but his mother spoke first. "You're late," she said. "I know," Ion replied quickly. I tried to. His father interrupted him and pushed the envelope into his hands. "This is your share." Ion frowned and opened it. Inside was a printed invoice with neat lines and numbers. Venue, food, decor. Photographer at the bottom was a total, circled in pen. His name was written beside it. For a second, his mind went blank. The sounds around him faded. "What is this?" he asked softly. "You promised to help with the costs," his mother said. "You weren't here to help in person, so this is fair." The words cut deeper than anger ever could. There was no concern in her voice, no question about why he was late, no understanding. Just expectation, just judgment. Ion looked up and saw Sana watching from across the room. Their eyes met for a moment. He searched her face for support, for surprise, for anything that said this wasn't her idea. She looked away. That was when the truth settled in. This wasn't about money. It never had been. It was about how they saw him. He had always been the responsible one. The son who paid on time. The brother who helped without being asked. When things went wrong, Ion fixed them. When money was short, Ion filled the gap. No one praised him for it. They just expected it. And the one time he failed to arrive on time, this was the price. His fingers tightened around the paper. He felt embarrassed standing there with an invoice in his hands like a customer instead of family. He nodded once, folded the paper carefully, and slipped it into his pocket. "Congratulations," he said to his mother, forcing a smile. She nodded back. Already distracted, Ion walked toward Santa. She smiled weakly when he reached her. "You missed most of it," she said. "I know," he replied. There was a pause. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She didn't mention the bill. She turned back to her guests. The conversation moved on without him. That silence hurt more than the invoice. Ion stayed only a few minutes longer, just long enough to say polite goodbyes. No one stopped him. No one asked if he was okay. When he stepped outside, the cool air hit his face. And he finally breathed as he walked to his car. Memories flooded his mind. Paying for Sana's engagement dress when she was short on cash. Covering household bills when his father retired early. Canceling trips, delaying his own plans, always choosing family first. He had done it willingly, believing it meant something. Now he wondered if it ever had. He sat in the car without starting the engine. His hands trembled, not from anger, but from realization. They hadn't trusted him. They hadn't respected him. They had measured his value in numbers on a page when he reached home. He placed the invoice on the table and stared at it for a long time. The house was quiet. No one calling. No one checking on him. The silence was heavy. Slowly. A different feeling replaced the hurt. Not rage. Not sadness. Clarity. If they believed money was his only role, then they would finally see what life looked like without his silent support. He wouldn't shout. He wouldn't accuse. He would let them feel the absence they had taken for granted. Ion folded the invoice once more and placed it in a drawer. His face hardened with resolve. That night, something inside him changed. The dependable son, the quiet helper, faded into the background. In his place stood a man who would no longer accept being reduced to a bill. Ion sat in his apartment, staring at the invoice on the table. The numbers glared at him like accusations, cold and final. He had replayed the entire scene in his mind countless times. His parents' calm expressions, Sanaa's distant smile. The casual way they treated his absence as though it were a small inconvenience. He had arrived late for one event, and suddenly his years of effort, his constant support, his sacrifices, all of it, were erased by a simple piece of paper. The realization stung more than he expected. He had always been the reliable one, the son who showed up, who paid bills, who fixed problems. And yet the moment he faltered, even for reasons beyond his control, the family treated him as if he were nothing more than a debtor. That night, Ion's mind churned. He didn't feel anger in the usual explosive way. It was sharper, colder, like a knife tracing the edge of his thoughts. The desire for revenge crept in quietly at first, like a shadow stretching over a familiar room. He knew he could hurt them, not with violence, not with lies, but with the tools they had unknowingly given him. He was trusted with the family's finances. He managed payments, deposits, arrangements. No one questioned him. Ed relied on him so heavily that even a small shift could create ripples. It was all in his hands. For days he sat at his desk, planning silently. Every request his family made now seemed like an opportunity. Sana wanted advice on maternity expenses. His parents needed guidance on refinancing. Cousins asked him to manage event deposits. Each time he felt the pull of temptation. He could delay payments, adjust figures subtly, make them feel the panic and frustration that had settled over him that day at the hall. He imagined the shock on their faces, the frustration when they realized they had been so dependent on him without appreciating him. That image warmed him in a strange, bittersweet way. But every time he opened his laptop, doubt gnawed at him. He remembered his mother staying up late to help him study. He remembered his father working long hours so that he could go to school without worry. He remembered Sana sharing her toys when they were children, keeping him safe from teasing, protecting him when the world was unfair. Could he really punish them for something that was a single moment, even if it hurt deeply? His thoughts spun, a storm of anger, guilt, and moral conflict. He wanted revenge, yes, but he also wanted to remain himself, to remain honorable. That made the choice more complicated. He couldn't simply lash out. He had to find a way to strike without losing his own identity. Weeks passed and the struggle consumed him. Each family request brought an internal debate. He could act or refrain. Each action had consequences. Every dollar he handled, every suggestion he made, every tiny error he could manipulate, AOHA could manipulate, it all became a chessboard in his mind. He imagined scenarios. The first, he subtly delays a payment for a family event. Panic ensues. His parents scramble. Sana realizes she can't rely on him anymore. The satisfaction was vivid. Yet immediately after, the guilt would creep in. Would he cross a line? Would this action create permanent damage? The moral weight pressed down on him. It wasn't just revenge, it was a test of his own ethics. Then he considered a different path. He didn't need to sabotage them. Perhaps the most powerful form of revenge was refusal. He could continue doing his work, but no longer silently, no longer without acknowledgement. He could set clear boundaries. No more free help. No more assumptions about his availability or willingness. He realized that in some ways this approach would hurt them more. They would still rely on him, but now he would be his own master, asserting control over what he gave. It was not instant satisfaction, but it was sustainable. and it preserved his conscience. It was a plan that demanded patience, subtlety, encouraged the kind of revenge that didn't rely on punishment, but on awareness. Ion spent nights crafting this invisible shield. He imagined conversations with his parents, scenarios where he would decline certain requests, ways he would speak with Santa about boundaries without sounding cold or cruel. He even rehearsed the words he would use, the tone he would keep, ensuring he maintained calm control. It became a game of strategy, balancing moral integrity with emotional justice. He realized the real power of revenge was not in the immediate reaction, but in long-term transformation. He could take back his respect without demeaning anyone else, and that became a new source of satisfaction, different but no less intense. Even as he considered these approaches, he could feel his own emotions twisting. Each time he thought of the invoice, of the cold way it was handed to him, he felt a flare of indignation. Yet the calm planning gave him a strange comfort. He wasn't acting out of blind rage anymore. He was reclaiming agency. The sense of helplessness that had weighed him down at the banquet hall was gone, replaced by a calculated clarity. He could choose when to act, how to act, and what consequences he was willing to accept. Ion's relationships became a lens for his internal struggle. Every interaction with his family reminded him of the balance between love and resentment. He still cared for them deeply, but he no longer wanted to be their invisible servant. They had taught him the value of responsibility, but they had also underestimated him. Now he would redefine the terms. It was subtle, but it felt revolutionary. Finally, after weeks of contemplation, he realized the choice was his alone. He could either exact revenge in ways that might humiliate them, creating pain and tension, or he could protect his own integrity and assert control over his role. The first option promised immediate satisfaction, a rush of vindication. The second promised long-term peace and respect, both from himself and from the boundaries he was establishing. Both paths carried weight. Both were forms of justice in their own way. Ion started taking small steps. When a family request came in, he asked questions, set clear terms, refused assumptions. No dramatic confrontations, no secret sabotage, just assertive presence. Each small act reinforced his sense of agency. He could see this subtle shift in his family's reliance on him. They had taken his dedication for granted, and now they had to consider it, respect it, negotiate it. That alone gave him a quiet satisfaction, different from the immediate thrill of revenge, but deeper and more meaningful. As he navigated these choices, Ion reflected on the emotions driving him. He recognized that the sting of betrayal was as much about being seen as a person as it was about the bill itself. It wasn't money he wanted to reclaim, it was recognition. The invoice had symbolized years of unnoticed effort. Every calculated refusal, every clear boundary, every measured word became a way to reclaim not just respect, but self-worth. Revenge in the traditional sense would have been fleeting, but this measured response allowed him to heal, maintain morality, and still make them aware of their mistakes. By the end of these weeks, Ion had transformed. He wasn't consumed by the desire to make them suffer. He was focused on making them notice him in the ways that mattered. They were still his family, still loved, but no longer allowed to define his value by their expectations. He had found a method of revenge that didn't destroy anyone, didn't create regret, and didn't compromise who he was. It was quiet, effective, and satisfying. The desire for revenge had not disappeared, had evolved. It was no longer about inflicting pain, but about reclaiming self-respect. The invoice had been a trigger, a spark that ignited weeks of planning, reflection, and self-discovery. And through it, Ion realized that the strongest power he possessed was control over his own choices, his own actions, and his own dignity. The revenge wasn't against them, it was against the helplessness they had imposed on him. And in that, he had won. The night of the family dinner arrived, and Ion felt a tension he hadn't expected. The house smelled of spices and roasting meat, laughter and chatter filling the air as relatives caught up with each other. From the moment he walked in, he could feel the weight of the invoice, the shadow of the baby shower pressing on him. Every smile, every casual remark about the baby or finances felt loaded. His parents were talking quietly about expenses, and Santa chimed in, excited about upcoming purchases. It was as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't been reduced to a bill just weeks ago. But he remembered. He remembered everything. And that memory sharpened his resolve. As the conversation shifted to planning for the baby. His mother said casually, "Ion will help with this. He always does." The words were meant to reassure everyone, but to Ion, they were like a spark falling on dry kindling. He felt a surge of anger and indignation, but underneath it, a cold clarity. This was the moment he had imagined countless times, the moment where he could either assert himself or let the cycle continue. He felt the desire for revenge flare inside him. For years, he had helped without question. Now, the balance of power had shifted, and he realized he held the control. Ion set down his glass deliberately. The room's chatter softened as his movement drew attention. His parents looked at him, expecting compliance. Instead, he took a breath, steadying his voice. "I won't," he said calmly. The simplicity of the statement was striking. The words were not shouted, not angry, just firm. Silence fell across the table. Even the clinking of utensils paused. No one had expected this. They had assumed his obedience, his quiet willingness to sacrifice himself for the family, was endless. For the first time, Ion was visible not as a helper, but as a person with boundaries. "What do you mean?" Santa asked, her voice tinged with surprise. She leaned forward slightly, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "I mean," Ion continued, "I paid the invoice for the baby shower. That was my contribution. From now on, everything is clear, written, and agreed upon. No assumptions." His words were deliberate, precise, each syllable carrying the weight of his experiences. This was not an attack, not a dramatic confrontation meant to humiliate them, but a declaration of his autonomy. His father frowned. "We're family," he said slowly, almost cautiously. There was a hint of confusion in his eyes. Family to him had always meant unquestioned expectation. But now Ion was challenging that definition. "So was I," Ion replied, his voice steady but edged with emotion. "When I needed understanding, I was given a bill instead." The truth hung in the air, undeniable and heavy. It wasn't just about the money. It was about recognition, about respect, about the years of quiet dedication that had been overlooked until this single moment of failure. Ion considered saying more, listing every instance where he had sacrificed, every favor, every silent effort. He imagined the shock on their faces, the regret, the sudden awareness of how much they had taken for granted. That would have been satisfying. Yes, a classic revenge scenario that would sting and teach a lesson. But as he looked at them, he realized that turning this moment into a battlefield would change him. It would make him the exact person he had resented, someone who used pain to control and manipulate. Instead, he chose a different path. "I won't punish you," he said, softening slightly, "but I won't erase myself anymore either." The words were firm but fair. He was reclaiming his own dignity, not creating enemies. The room remained silent, the tension thick but not hostile. He could see confusion, maybe guilt, flickering across his parents' faces. Sanaa's eyes widened, as if she finally understood the consequences of her assumptions. For the first time, they were confronted not with rebellion, but with self-respect. Ion was not their servant, their automatic helper, or their financial cushion. He was a person who deserved acknowledgement, and he would no longer allow himself to be invisible. After a moment, he rose from the table. His hands trembled slightly, betraying the storm of emotions beneath his calm exterior. The adrenaline from asserting himself was mingled with vulnerability. He had laid bare his feelings without aiming to hurt. Yet the act itself felt like both a victory and a risk. He left the dinner quietly, without looking back, not out of fear or shame, but because the decision had been made. He had spoken his truth, and now the consequences would unfold in their own time. For the first time in years, he felt in control of his own life. Walking home, Ion reflected on what had just happened. He hadn't sought revenge in the traditional sense. He hadn't manipulated numbers, delayed payments, or caused panic. Instead, he had taken control of his role in the family, setting boundaries that had been absent for years. That simple act, which might have seemed small to an outsider, carried immense weight for him. It represented a shift from being defined by others to defining himself, from silent suffering to active agency. The quiet power of choice, he realized, was more satisfying than any act of retribution could be. In the days that followed, his family's behavior began to change subtly. They stopped assuming his compliance. They consulted him more respectfully, acknowledged his limits, and, most importantly, began to notice him as a person rather than a tool. Santa sent a message late one night, apologizing not perfectly, not with grand gestures, but sincerely. She admitted she had felt entitled, that she had assumed his willingness was infinite. Ion read the message carefully, feeling a mix of relief and lingering pain. Forgiveness was not immediate, but a seed had been planted. The invoice was still in his drawer, a reminder not of humiliation, but of awakening. It marked the turning point when he had chosen self-respect over vengeance.ayan. Thought back to that night at the dinner table repeatedly. He understood now that revenge could be a trap. It's an endless cycle of hurt and retaliation that consumes the one seeking it as much as the target. He had felt the temptation to punish, to humiliate, to make them suffer as he had suffered. But he had resisted. The act of setting boundaries, of asserting his own worth, had provided a deeper satisfaction. It was an unexpected lesson. Sometimes the strongest revenge is not to inflict pain, but to reclaim oneself. By refusing to be the invisible family's servant, he had changed the dynamic without creating lasting harm. He realized the invoice, the event, and the tension of that evening had all been catalysts. They forced him to see clearly what he had allowed himself to accept for years. The pain had been real, but the path he chose transformed it into something constructive. Instead of becoming embittered, he had grown stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. His family would have to adjust, to recognize and respect him in new ways. And he could do so without losing his morality, without creating lasting damage, and without compromising who he was. It was a victory of intellect and emotion over impulse. In the quiet that followed, Ion felt a calm that had eluded him for weeks. He understood that revenge in its classic form, hurting someone in retaliation, would have left him entangled in resentment indefinitely. Instead, he had found a form of justice that healed and empowered. His anger had been real, but it had been channeled into awareness, clarity, and boundaries. He could move forward without carrying the weight of humiliation or the desire to punish. The invoice remained in the drawer, a symbol not of wrongdoing, but of awakening. A reminder that respect must be mutual and boundaries are essential. For Ion, the experience became a defining moment. He learned that true power doesn't come from inflicting pain, but from knowing one's worth and asserting it calmly and deliberately. The family dynamics had shifted subtly, but irreversibly. They would never take him for granted in the same way again, and he would never allow a single moment of oversight or misunderstanding to define him. The lesson was clear, and it resonated deeply. Sometimes the most profound revenge is not revenge at all, but the reclamation of dignity, autonomy, and self-respect. In the end, that was a victory that no invoice, no slight, no misunderstanding could ever take away.